Hey guys, today I want to give you 6 tips to keep your African violets healthy and blooming. The first tip is for those of you who do not already have African violets, so if you've already got African violets, skip to tip number 2. But the first tip is to start with a healthy plant. You want to look for plants with really healthy leaves, and obviously you want a bloom color that you really like. You don't want to get anything that's been in a container that does not have drainage. So if you can pop the plant out of the pot at the store and take a look at the root system, that's even better. Make sure the roots look good and the plant looks good overall. Tip number 2 is to give your violets the right amount of light. The number 1 reason why African violets don't bloom is because they are not getting sufficient light. You want them to be in bright but indirect light. Direct sun will burn their leaves. So a north or east facing window is the best. Somewhere where they can sit where it's nice and bright, but somewhere where they're not going to be sitting in full-on sun. You also want to keep your violets away from the cold glass of the window and make sure to rotate them once a week, and that way all the leaves will receive the same amount of light and it will help maintain a nice even shape. Now you can put your violets under a grow light, especially during the winter months when our days aren't as long, and that will help your violets stay healthy. Tip number 3 is to keep them warm. They typically like the same kind of temperatures us humans do. So if you keep your house at around 70, give or take a couple of degrees, they will be a happy plant. They prefer temps between 70 and 85 during the day and 65 to 70 at night. Tip number 4 is to water from underneath. African violets do not like to be watered from overhead. In fact, if you get water on their leaves, it can make them burn and soggy and really just unsightly. So to water them from underneath, all you need to do is put enough water in their saucer so that they can sit in it for about an hour, soak up what they need, and then you can pour out any excess. If your saucer isn't big enough, you can always put them in a tray, a pan, the bottom of a sink, anything that can hold about an inch of water. You also want to make sure to allow them to dry out between waterings. You want, when you put your fingers on the top of the soil, you want it to feel pretty dry. And I kind of get to know how my violets feel when they're watered, when they're just watered. I can tell based on weight. So that's a really good gauge. If you can kind of get to know your plant, get to know how heavy the pot is, and that way when you lift it up and you feel it's light, then you know you're getting to a point where you need to water. Tip number 5 is to fertilize regularly with an African violet specific fertilizer. You want to make sure that you're giving your violets the correct nutrients. I use Espoma's Organic African Violet Fertilizer every 2 to 4 weeks, spring through fall. You don't need to worry about fertilizing in the winter months. And this fertilizer is also great for all other blooming houseplants. Tip number 6 is to only repot them when necessary. African violets tend to bloom better when they're slightly root bound, but there is a fine line between them being root bound enough to bloom and them being overly root bound to the point where they get unhealthy. General rule of thumb is you want your violet to be in a pot about 1/3 the size of the diameter of the leaf spread. So let's say you have a violet that measures 12 inches across. That means you want it in a pot about 4 inches. Now that's generally speaking. Typically your violets need to be repotted about once a year, and when you get ready to repot, you want to make sure that you're using the correct soil. Traditional or regular potting mixes are not the best for African violets because they're typically too heavy and they hold too much water. African violets like a lot of aeration around their roots, so you need to use an African violet specific soil. I'm using Espoma Organic African Violet soil, and it's made of sphagnum, peat humus, and perlite. It's a nice lofty mix so our roots can easily grow. It gets a lot of air in there and it makes for very happy violets. So those are my 6 tips on how to keep your African violets happy and healthy. We did put together a video that talks more specifically on how to repot your African violet and some of the tips and tricks I've learned throughout the years to have the most success with it. If you're interested in watching that video, we will put a link in the comment or description down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Bye.